What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Monday, everybody. I hope you all had a relaxing weekend and are ready for a productive week ahead. Just a heads up at the beginning of this episode is going to be very macroeconomic focused. On Monday, today, the National Bureau of Statistics in Beijing published official economic data for the first quarter. According to this official data, People's Republic of China GDP grew by 4.8% in Q1 this year. Now, even if we assume that this data is accurate, this is more of a reflection of the first 2 months of relatively positive performance due to the front-loading of fiscal spending on fixed asset investment, mostly infrastructure. Indeed, we can see with the graph here that retail sales, a good proxy for household consumption, contracted 3.5% in March from a year ago. The headline growth number also very much hides the sharp deterioration in economic activity in March as COVID-19 outbreaks and lockdowns hit consumers and factories. As we have seen and will see more shortly, this economic pain has continued into April. Quote, "Forget the first quarter GDP data showing a pickup in growth. The March activity data tell the real story. China's economy is in the worst shape it's been since early 2020, when the pandemic first slammed growth. April's data will probably reveal more weakness." End quote. Domestic economists agree. Quote, "The first quarter GDP growth is strong, but China's economy slowed sharply in March due to COVID outbreaks in many cities." End quote. I would add here too that it is the lockdowns in response to outbreaks more than the outbreaks themselves, which is hurting economic performance. A few hours ago, China finance expert at Peking University, Michael Pettis, made the following observation regarding the economic data too. Quote, "China's Q1 GDP grew by 4.8% year-on-year and 1.3% quarter-on-quarter, 5.3% annualized. This came in above very low expectations, but for me the real concern was in the way growth was distributed. It is driven mainly by fixed asset investment and exports, with domestic consumption continuing to perform poorly. While I assume consumption will improve over the rest of the year, Beijing will meet its growth target mainly by pressing on the same supply-side levers. So while I expect China to meet the growth target of 5.5%, I expect it will do so by worsening China's already deep demand imbalances. This means a substantial rise in China's debt burden this year and an even more difficult adjustment, beginning, perhaps, after the Party Congress." End quote. Okay, moving on. Fiscal stimulus continues to be pumped into the economy. We remember that last week the State Council gave the green light to billions of dollars worth of infrastructure projects. Over the weekend, analysts were able to confirm that the powerful National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC, has already approved 32 projects worth a combined 520 billion yuan or $81.6 billion so far this year, almost more than all of 2021. Over the weekend, the National Development and Reform Commission also announced that 102 major projects that were meant to be spread over the entire 14th five-year plan period are being brought forward for this year. Projects include parts of the incredibly expensive and controversial Sichuan-Tibet Railway, which is currently under construction. We will get back to the economic disruptions due to lockdowns and outbreaks shortly. But first, let's continue with other financial developments. Late last week, the National Internet Finance Association of China, the China Banking Association, and the Securities Association of China jointly published a proposal calling on their members to, quote, "prevent financial risks associated with non-fungible tokens, NFTs." End quote. The proposal is not legally binding, but it is a strong sign to the market that regulatory crackdown could be on its way for NFTs. Indeed, last Thursday, a central bank official speaking to state media expressed that China will tighten regulations for virtual currency and NFTs. And quickly, one last thing while we're on this part before we move to Shanghai. Chinese financial outlet Caixin reports that China's Vice Finance Minister Liao Min said he expects more financial policies to be issued to help the recovery of the country's heavily and painfully hit logistics industry, which has been severely impacted by the repeated outbreaks of COVID-19 and strict lockdowns, particularly around the Yangtze River Delta. More on this shortly. Speaking at the Tsinghua Global Finance Forum 2022 over the weekend, the Vice Minister expressed, quote, "I expect the financial departments to provide key logistics, warehousing and e-commerce companies with more services designed to keep logistics and their supply chains intact during this special time." End quote. He also warned that China's economy is still facing the so-called triple pressures, namely shrinking demand, supply shocks, and weakening expectations, which was worsened by the resurgence of COVID and strict lockdowns that we've seen over the country. This idea of the triple pressures is something that we've been following since late last year. This announcement came a few days after the central government issued a series of decrees supporting logistics and supplies to regions hit by outbreaks in response to rising unrest in lockdown-hit regions, particularly in Shanghai. In just 48 hours after 162 highway exits and 81 service centers that had previously been closed for virus control were reopened after public backlash. With this announcement too, it's important that we keep in mind that it's not just Western media that is saying that the Chinese economy is in trouble or facing difficulties. Chinese financial media and Chinese officials themselves, as we can just see, are admitting that the economy and the economic issues facing the country are very serious. Because we are following economic developments in China on a granular day-by-day sort of basis, on China Update, much of the coverage over the last few months has been bearish or even pessimistic. However, this is simply because of the nature of the current economic situation in China. If issues remain acute, China Update videos will reflect this. If the situation improves, then videos will reflect this too. The purpose of this channel is to try and provide a grounded and accurate telling of macro developments and trends in China, particularly on the economic and geopolitical side. Sometimes there will be periods of lots of good news, and sometimes there will be periods of bad news. And with that said, let us move to Shanghai. But quickly, as always guys, if you enjoy the content, don't forget to hit the like button, it really does help. And for anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help keep this channel sustainable, Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee and crypto links are in the description below. Thank you very much everybody for all the support. Not a day goes by without new disturbing videos of the lockdown in Shanghai surfacing, ongoing food and medical supply issues, as well as just general frustrations residents feel towards the lockdown and its implementation has caused much anger among many in the financial megacity of 25 to 26 million people. Some of that anger has spilled into the streets, with episodes of small-scale clashes between residents and security personnel being recorded over the last several days. Most residents, though, are simply expressing their frustrations online. Over the weekend, a clip played for the national evening news showing happy Shanghainese buying food at a well-stocked supermarket was derided online, with netizens pointing out that the people in the video were wearing winter clothes in April. As we covered last week, however, the leadership in Beijing has made it clear that China will not be abandoning the dynamic zero cases policy, and with new daily cases in Shanghai still in the tens of thousands, including hundreds of cases outside quarantine facilities, Shanghai still has a long period of lockdown ahead of them, and the government has the tools to ensure that this lockdown period stays in place as long as they need, though it will cost a lot of economic and political capital. Logistics disruptions and economic pains deepen as we move into this week. Quote, Shanghai, with annual gross domestic product exceeding 4 trillion yuan, $627 billion, is a financial and commercial center that's critical for industries including automobiles, semiconductors, and other electronics. Shanghai has the world's largest container port and serves as a hub for China's vast global trade network. Disruptions are rippling through international supply chains for goods from electric vehicles to iPhones. End quote. Logistics in the Yangtze River Delta, one of the most economically significant regions in the world, remains crippled. One truck freight service company, speaking to Chinese financial media, expressed yesterday, quote, the transportation of goods is a mess in the Zhejiang, Jiangsu, and Shanghai regions. end quote, and went on to explain that intercity truck drivers face greater risks of being stranded in virus-hit regions or stuck between destinations for days because of strict local virus measures. Road freight accounts for more than 50% of the container transport volume at the port of Shanghai, which, as we just mentioned, is the largest container port in the world. European Union Chamber of Commerce in China calculations put Shanghai port operations down 40% since the lockdown. According to flight tracking site Veriflight, VARI flight, more than 98% of flights in and out of Shanghai were cancelled in the first week of lockdowns, smashing air freight numbers. As we discussed last week, research at the Chinese University of Hong Kong conservatively estimated that a 1-month shutdown could slash Shanghai's income by 61%, reducing national income by 8.6% for that month, representing a 0.7% loss for China's GDP for the year, and that is just with Shanghai. As of Monday of last week, 7 days ago, according to data from Nomura, 40% of China's economy was under lockdown. Since then, more cities have increased restrictions, including the ancient city of Xi'an, the city of 13 million famous for the terracotta warriors, and which already went through a month-long lockdown in December of last year, announced over the weekend that quote-unquote temporary control measures will be implemented from Saturday to Tuesday, requiring residents to avoid non-essential activities outdoors. Some viewers currently in Shanghai may point out that they were told that their lockdown was to be temporary too. Xi'an is home to factories of leading semiconductor makers including Samsung and Micron. Now, speaking of semiconductor manufacturing and moving our focus back to Shanghai, Yicai reports that semiconductor and electronics producers in Shanghai and neighboring areas like Jiangsu are, quote, scrambling to keep plants running as COVID-related restrictions disrupt businesses, putting more pressure on the already fragile global tech supply chain, end quote. In 2021, integrated circuit sales in Shanghai reached $40.4 billion, a quarter of the national total. Yicai analysts observed too that Shanghai is also home to more than 200,000 semiconductor industry workers, nearly 40% of the country's total. Most of this production has been halted or cut. The auto industry, which has tremendous potential to be a dynamic future sector for the Chinese economy, is facing pains too, with one industry insider warning in a post online a few days ago, quote, if Shanghai cannot resume production in May, all of the tech and industrial players that have supply chains in the area will come to a complete halt, especially the automotive industry. That will pose severe consequences and massive losses for the whole industry. End quote. Hey guys, I'd love to hear what you thought about some of the updates we covered in today's episode, so throw your comments below. Always love hearing from you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.